Hey there, everyone. I'm meteorologist Hannah Fink, and thank you so much for joining me for Next Weather. In this segment, we're going to be breaking down the national and local weather overview for this Friday, which is August 14th, and how it's going to drive our weather in the coming week. So we are currently tracking a high-impact weather event moving across the country, starting with the relentless heat wave that is refusing to break across the southern United States. And we also are monitoring some severe weather in the Midwestern region, and we do have an update on the tropics as we are approaching the peak of hurricane season. So let's dive right into the 4 things you need to know in regards to this forecast. First, dangerous heat is our dominant national headline. A massive ridge of high pressure is parked right over the United States at this time, sending heat index values soaring into the triple digits. Second, severe weather is not widespread in our area, but we do have some severe weather off to our north where strong storms could be something they need to keep an eye on in the Midwestern region, highlighted there in red and yellow. Third, the tropical Atlantic is getting busier, and we are entering the climatological peak of hurricane season. And the National Hurricane Center is currently monitoring 2 tropical waves at this time. And then, of course, closer to home, the Gulf Coast is stuck in a summertime pattern where even though we aren't expecting a cold front anytime soon, unfortunately, we are instead looking at an intense heat, high humidity, poor overnight recovery, and daily thunderstorm activity kind of setup. So let's break it down on what exactly is happening in the science behind it. So we have this ridge of high pressure over the southeastern United States at this time. In a ridge, air sinks. And as that air sinks, it compresses, warms up, and dynamically suppresses cloud development. That means maximum sunshine and intense daytime heating throughout the entirety of the day, meaning clouds don't develop, they can't really develop, but they're not limited to overall development, mainly because we still have that Gulf connection. So that high pressure is trying to keep things quiet, but the Gulf is continuously pumping warm, moist air into the Fox 10 viewing area. So when you combine that sinking air, hot air, and relentless moisture, you can still see some instability in the atmosphere. So things aren't completely quiet and cloud coverage isn't completely gone. We can still see those classic pop-up showers and thunderstorms that are fueled during the afternoon hours. So the heat overall is not just uncomfortable, it can get dangerous for those vulnerable to the heat through medication, older age, younger age. Also, pets can feel this, but also if you have to be outside for prolonged periods of time. We are forecasting peak heat index values up to about 115 degrees over the next 7-day period. Remember, actual temperature is not how hot the air is, but humidity dictates how hard your body has to work to cool itself down through the process of sweat evaporation. So when humidity is this high, your body experiences conditions equivalent to basically overheating, heat exhaustion, and also the typical what we expect those heat-related illnesses. So heat exhaustion, severe overheating, etc. So you need to know the signs behind that as well. So overall, what makes this event particularly hazardous is the overnight hours. Normally right before we bring in, or normally overall overnight hours brings relief because that's when we expect our temperatures to go down. But they're actually going to be well above average and will be bottoming out only in the upper 70s and some of us closer to the coastline, lower 80s. This lack of nighttime recovery means we are stacking heat stress day after day. This cumulative effect is what makes prolonged heat waves much more dangerous than one single hot afternoon. Now I want to break down and transition into the severe weather pattern because it does have an impact on other areas besides how hot it is for us. So let's take a closer look at the National Severe Weather Threat from the Storm Prediction Center's Day 1, Day 2, and Day 3 outlook that connect directly to the big weather pattern we have here in the South. So first, a quick explanation on what we're looking at. The Storm Prediction Center, or SPC, issues severe weather outlooks several days in advance. Day 1 is today, Day 2 is tomorrow, which is Saturday, then Day 3 is the following day, also Sunday. As you go further out in time, the exact location and intensity of storms becomes more uncertain. So let's start with Day 1, which is today. The Day 1 outlook tells us where the greatest potential for severe thunderstorms is at this current day. When you take a look at that map, the more significant severe weather is placed over to the north and east of us. And there's a reason for that. We have a strong upper level ridge of high pressure dominating much of the southern United States. Think of this as a giant ridge or a giant heat dome. Underneath the center of that ridge, air is sinking. Sinking air warms and stabilizes the atmosphere, making it much harder for large thunderstorms to develop. Meanwhile, the stronger winds aloft and greater wind shear are being pushed towards the edge of that ridge. That's where the atmosphere has more ingredients for organized thunderstorm development. So on day one, the severe weather threat is essentially following the perimeter of the heat dome while we sit underneath the more stable core. Now, it's pretty similar for our day two setup, which is tomorrow. The day two outlook gives us a look at where severe weather could become more favorable as the pattern evolves over the next 24 to 48 hours. And this is where it becomes really important not to look at the Storm Prediction Center map in isolation. You can think of the ridge like a big protective bubble of hot sinking air. As long as that ridge remains firmly established over the Gulf Coast, it continues to suppress widespread thunderstorm development here. But around the outside edge of that bubble, air can rise more easily, and you can also see stronger upper level winds and more wind shear. Those are the ingredients that help thunderstorms become more organized and potentially severe. So if the day two severe threat remains concentrated north or east of us, that's telling us the core of the ridge is still holding over our area, while the more favorable severe weather ingredients remain displaced around the edges of that bubble. Now, as we get into the day three outlook, it's looking further ahead, roughly 48 to 72 hours, and the forecast becomes less specific. We're not necessarily trying to predict exactly which county gets a severe storm 3 days in advance. Instead, we're looking for the larger scale pattern on where the ingredients may come together. And that's where the ridge becomes the big player once again. If that ridge remains strong across the southern United States, the overall setup doesn't suddenly flip into a widespread severe weather pattern. Instead, the heat dome continues to act as a suppressing force, while the more favorable storm environment remains concentrated along its outer perimeter. Now here, that part matters most for us locally. Just because we're underneath that ridge does not mean we're completely dry. In fact, we're dealing with an incredible amount of moisture underneath that heat dome. So the Gulf is essentially providing us with a constant supply of warm, humid air. So during the afternoon, the sun heats the land intensely. That creates rising air. Then we have a local boundary, also known as a sea breeze, that can provide another source of lifting. So think of the atmosphere like this. We have these ingredients of the Gulf providing the fuel, the afternoon heat provides the energy, the sea breeze provides a trigger. So even though we have this ridge trying to protect us and keep things quiet, those three things do not completely limit the chance and make it zero and disrupt it. Yes, the rain chances and thunderstorm chances are much lower than what we typically see, but they're not zero. So most of the time, that lid just keeps storms from becoming more widespread or organized, but in a few locations, the combinations of extreme heat, deep Gulf moisture, and localized boundaries can become strong enough to overcome that cap. So that's why we still have rain chances in the overall forecast. Now, looking ahead at our rain chances, I want to take a look into why we are seeing more of an isolated look. So yes, we have that Gulf moisture in play. We're having that consistently being pumped into the area. So that's why it's going to be more isolated pop-up showers and thunderstorms, which we are seeing on our model. So even though we have that ridge is trying to keep things quiet on an earlier summer month, that would be the case where things are quiet. But since we're in August, September, and October, that's where we see a lot more of that Gulf moisture come into play. Now, we do have a heat advisory in place still until 8 p.m. tonight, and then we're going to copy and paste that heat advisory for our day on Saturday as well from 11 a.m. through 8 p.m. for heat index values getting up to about 110 to 112. And then looking ahead in our 7-day forecast, the pattern remains pretty locked in for the most part. Today, we were in the mid to upper 90s with a few pop-up showers and thunderstorms in our more northern counties, especially east of I-65. That looks pretty similar for our day on Saturday as well. Sunday, again, is going to be a scorcher, but we do have a higher chance for rain just because of a shortwave disturbance. Again, it's one of those boundaries we just talked about. Then heading into early next week, the heat actually intensifies possibly, but we'll know that more certain going through the weekend based off of where the ridge is placed and how much it has strengthened. But from what we're seeing from models, we're seeing the intensity in that heat and heat indices remaining in that dangerous 105 to 112 range. While pop-up storms may briefly drop temperatures, and we could see a few of them, it'll only help us out very, very briefly by dropping the temperatures by about 15 degrees in localized spots. But then once those storms move away, it's just an extra steamier feel. Now, going into the tropics, it's been quite busy this week, and that's to be expected. Now we're getting into the point of hurricane season where we see a lot more tropical waves in the actual Atlantic themselves. We did see Tropical Storm Cristobal earlier this week. It was very short-lived. It ran into some colder water, so really it wasn't expected to live very long. It was just known as a fish storm, and what a fish storm means is it wasn't affecting land. But we still are tracking these two other waves that are just to the east of Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles, and then to the west of the Cape Verde Islands. So they're still very disorganized, and if anything, the National Hurricane Center has actually dropped their percentage chances for formation. So that yellow circle right there has a 10% chance in the next 2 days and a 10% chance in the next 7 days. If you remember earlier this week, that actually had an 80%, and we thought that could have been Tropical Storm Dolly. But there is so much wind shear and there is so much Saharan dust that this is actually a very hostile environment for tropical wave activity. The only reason that that other wave right behind it has a 40% chance of development in the next 7 days is just because it's further behind it, so it's not interacting with that stronger wind shear. Now, we're in that point of hurricane season where this is to be expected. We're going to see these tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa just because this is their monsoon season. But because we're in an El Nino pattern, more wind shear is to come. So even though development itself and the potential for tropical activity is not completely zeroed out, there's a lot more atmospheric ingredients that can disrupt and prevent any tropical development from furthering or actually intensifying. So that's something we got to keep an eye on. And this is why we update you each and every day, because originally we thought this original picture a couple days ago we could have seen Tropical Storm Dolly, but now the chances of that is looking much smaller. So I want to wrap this up by giving you some tips to stay cool. You make sure you stay hydrated, take plenty of breaks in the shade, and even if you can get into the air conditioning, that's a better option. Dress for the heat. That means lighter colors, lighter clothing, no long sleeve, no heavy fabric. Just make sure you have breathable material that you're okay to sweat in, and also know the signs of those heat-related illnesses. So this is overall the setup that we're expecting going into this weekend and the week ahead. The heat is going to be the main story in the long-term forecast. So again, make sure you protect yourself, protect your loved ones, check on those vulnerable to the heat, and know the signs of those heat-related illnesses. This also can apply to your furry friends as well.